Alright, we're back here with our next video, the next step in our process, which is going to be working with our container and our header, which I've added here. It's the same code as before. I'm just going to keep adding to it. The only thing you'll see missing here is the background image, since I mentioned we're going to make a new background image for this. So here we go. We got two IDs here. We've got the container ID and the header ID. And if you remember, IDs start with those pound signs. Okay, so I got pound container, or number sign container, whatever you like to call it, and pound header, or number sign header. And those IDs live inside of my HTML. Okay, that's what I'm trying to control, is these IDs here. Here's where they're at. We have our div with an ID of container, and that div happens to contain, as its name would imply, everything. Okay, it contains everything inside the body. Then the div ID header is right here, and it only contains an image. Okay, nothing else. It's a pretty basic div there. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start applying some styles here. And the container ID here is similar to the body in that it belongs to the div that's a parent of everything, but since we already have a lot of the basic default properties that are in the body, we're not going to add them here because those are going to pass along to the children anyway. So what we're going to do here is a couple of things. We're going to give it the width of our website, okay, as well as some positioning, okay. So the width is going to come from depending on the size that you want it to be. Okay, so depending on what you made in Photoshop, your width might be different than mine. Now, I'm in a resolution that's 800 by 600. That's really small for the purposes of these tutorials, so I know the width of my website is 800 pixels. Alright, so this width here is 800 pixels. It's zoomed out a little bit here, but it would take up the entire screen if it was full screen. Okay, so that's where I'm going to get my measurements from, is this image here. Okay, we'll go into Photoshop a little bit and figure this out. So I know it's 800 pixels, but to start with, because I want to show you guys some positioning for this, I'm going to start at 400 pixels, and I'll switch it back to 800 pixels in a minute. Okay, I'll show you guys why in a second. So there's my width for the entire website. Okay, and we know it's 800, but for the purposes of this example, I'm going to leave it at 400 for now. Okay, we'll change it in a second. Reason being is we're going to try to center our content in the center of the web browser. Okay, rather than leaving it left aligned, and because you can leave your entire page left aligned if you'd like, but the centering of the web page looks a little nicer in presentation most of the time, so that's what we're going to try to do with ours here in a second. Okay, so we'll switch back to 800 pixels in a minute and let the video catch up, and we'll do that. Here we go. Okay, so we're going down the next line here, and I'm going to give it a margin. If you remember, our margin works similar to padding in that it can be shorthanded to just one or two values as long as they all match. In this case, I know my top and bottom margin is going to be 0 pixels, so my entire website is going to be butted up against the top of the web browser. Okay, I don't want any space there. And then I'm going to give it a new value you haven't seen called auto. Okay, what auto does is it centers whatever this ID is in, so in this case the div of with ID container, is going to center inside of its parent, which in this case is the body or the web browser. So it's always going to stay centered, and it's always going to be 400 pixels wide. Okay, so with this setup, let's go see what happens. I'm going to open this in my web browser, and there you go. So the div itself that contains everything is now only 400 pixels wide, so all the content needs to live within those 400 pixels. Okay, and now if I resize my browser, notice how it moves with it. Okay, that's because it's staying centered inside the web browser window at all times. And if I shrink it all the way down, at some point it does collapse, but it stays centered in the web browser window. So that's what we want. It's a really nice, clean look most of the time, so I would highly recommend it. If you don't want it to move around and stay centered, you could just leave the margins at 0, and it'll stay all the way butted up against the left-hand side. So here it is at 800 pixels, which is why I couldn't do it at 800 pixels before, because that's the size of my entire window, so I can't resize it and show you how that would work. So back to 800 pixels, so this is the size we actually want. Okay, and you could also give this a border. I'm going to not give it a border at the moment. We'll see how it looks at the end of the background image, but it would basically add a border around the entire website, which would look kind of cool. You could also do background images in your container if it's necessary, and we'll see if it's necessary later on in the layout. But that's it for container, and now let's move on.